Hey, what's up guys, Chris here and welcome to another Creatrix Visuals tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at how to do an awesome dirt wave effect like a blast, and specifically like when a character does something like a landing or an action move and impact and dirt just splats through. But the trick is we're going to do it while the camera has a dynamic movement, and specifically when the camera approaches the character as he does the action thing. So with that said, let's take a look at the clip. Pretty cool. As you guys can see, we have a lot to work with. It's fairly simple, but I like the fact that we can actually do this effect while the camera is moving through space. So, before we get started, just a quick note guys, you can always get access to the project files of this tutorial, which includes the assets, the footage, the projects, everything in the Creatrix Store, and that way you can help me make more tutorials for you guys for a very small fee. And also, we're running a special promo on the Creatrix Store right now where you can get a free product when you spend 20 bucks or more, which is basically like with 2 products you can get 3, and the product is of your own choice. So head over there, and with that said, fire up After Effects and let's get started. Okay guys, so let's take a look at the project overall and see what we got. So if I go here, you can see we have the footage, we have the tracking, which we're going to take a look at, and then we have the assets, and then simply we have 2 adjustment layers for the color grading of the footage, which there is a tutorial on this overall Mad Max inspired color grading process. Let me isolate the 2 footage, which is the same footage, it's a split for a reason, and this is what we have to work with. So let me scroll here at the beginning. So here's our guitar player ready to go into his solo and stamp its foot down to the ground, and that's where we want the dirt wave to basically come up. So here's how you start this thing off. What we need to do is first track the footage, and what I did here, I split it the layer to this point because I don't need After Effects to track anything after this point. After this point, the dirt waves are done, there's nothing to track anymore, and so I split it the layer so After Effects knows that, hey, this is all I need to track and this is my stopping point. So let me go back at the beginning. So here's the trick. Now I used the built-in After Effects camera tracker. In this situation it worked pretty well, and the thing is I used a 13mm prime set at 1.8 if I'm not mistaken. So as you can see, when we go close to the guitar player, the bokeh that we have is quite significant. So usually when you track things, you do not want bokeh because it's very hard for After Effects to pick a tracking point and multiple tracking points and solve the camera for you. But in this case it worked just fine. And remember, as we saw in the Fallen Soldier hand flames tutorial, you can also manually track things and combine the tracks to multiple null objects so you can solve your scene in terms of tracking points. And of course, if that doesn't work, you can go into tracking solutions such as Mocha, etc. But let's take a look. So what I need to do here, I select my clip, right click and select track camera. And what After Effects is going to do is going to go through, track my scene and get a bunch of data over to me so I can select what I want to work with or not. So let's take a moment until this is done and we'll see what we got. Okay guys, so the camera is done, and as you can see we have a pretty nice array of points, and as we can see, as I scrap through the points, we can see that the plane in which After Effects thinks our scene is quite accurate. You see, like if I select these points, well, not really, but around here we can see there. We can see that these points are really a good representation of basically our scene. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna select 3 points, but simply scrubbing through and hitting the left click, and I'm going to select right click and enter create null and camera. So what that's gonna do, it's gonna automatically create a camera for a scene, as well as a track null object that is linked to that camera. So if I press P here, you can see all these position points that the camera has, which the null is linked to. Which then what I'm gonna do is, as if I go to my project here, and as you can see I have my assets folder, and I start bringing in my dirt assets. If I toggle this switch, I can turn them into 3D layers, as you can see this ones. And what that's gonna do is After Effects is gonna animate them in terms of position in 3D space, because they're 3D objects and we have a 3D track. So I'm gonna simply delete this because I have the exact same track camera here, as you can see. So let me see, and these are null objects, and if we go through we can see that it sticks to our plane fairly well. So let's take a look at what we have to do in order to make dirt assets really fit into our scene. So I'm gonna scrub through here, and I'm gonna put the resolution to half just so the computer can handle all this preview. So, and I'm gonna start opening my dirt assets. So you can discuss it. If I scrub through by hitting page down, so I go frame by frame, we can see that as the guitar player's foot stomps down, that's where we start seeing the dirt really coming through. But here's the thing, when you have assets, it's not that easy to just link them up, sync them up to the footage, and they're good to go, right? So a cool trick that you can do is play with the opacity of your assets. So if I select all of my dirt assets and hit T, we can see that we play a lot with the opacity, especially at the beginning, and as they go through. For example, the major ones in terms of waves are these two. So as you can see, I play with the opacity and put keyframes here so they start from 0, even though there is a clip there. So if I turn them up to 100%, let me select both of them, ramp them up to 100%, you can see right there, 100%, that we have clips there. So if I turn it off and on, you can see that they start going there. So Control Z multiple times. So if I scrape through, the assets appear in a very smooth way because of the opacity keyframing. So if we go through, you can see, and because of our null object and the 3D camera track, you can see that those really start to go through the camera and they don't just stay there and it doesn't look fake, basically. So playing with opacity in order to sync your assets is a really easy way to start making things fit in your scene, even though they're CG assets. So let me close this up. And as you can see, the interesting thing here is that I have let me select them first. 4 of my assets here are 3D, but I have the lens dust asset, and if I open this up, which is not 3D, and there's a reason, because if I isolate only the lens dust, you can see as I scrub through that it's basically dirt that's very up close to the camera. So there's no real definition in terms of the ground and how that dirt would move through, and therefore I don't really need it to be a 3D layer because it's so close to the camera that if I don't have it linked to the null object, it's going to do a very good job because it just does that, swivels around in space anyways. So, but what this does, if I go through again, you can see that it really starts filling up the space and in more general the air around. So if I turn it off, if we only have the dust waves, they're cool and all, but they hit the ground and they kind of dissipate through the ground, but we don't really get the sense that that dirt is coming towards us as it would be in real life, right? So with the asset that is very up close to the lens, we solve that problem. So as you can see, it really fills up, but the trick is I did the same thing. I played with the opacity and kind of moved it around in the timeline in order to get that good sense of where it should start. And by having the smooth transition from 0% opacity up to 100% basically, we get a very cool fading effect, as in it fades upwards as the shock waves start coming in, right? So as
he hits the ground and the dirt wave or the dirt shock wave starts initiating. That's where I put my keyframes in terms of opacity, so that the up close dirt starts appearing, so you get the sense that that dust wave, it was what generated that dirt to begin with. So if I scrub through, you guys can see how it looks. And as we go through, because this is a 3D camera solve, my dust waves are very quickly going to disappear as the camera swivels towards the character, because basically what the camera does, it moves towards the character, and as such the dirt dust waves will move away and go through the camera, and then they're basically left behind the camera in a senseless way, because that's what the track showed. But with the inclusion of a dust effect asset that is not linked to that 3D layer, to that 3D camera and node object, it always stays in frame, in 3D space, right? So as I scrub through, this is a good point to start dissipating the overall dirt. So I put another keyframe in terms of opacity, and as we go through, I decrease that layer's opacity until it's basically nothing. And that was the entire effect, guys. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. Many tutorials suggest that you should put dirt effects and change their blending mode in order to make them like fit in the scene, but that's not really good in my opinion, because that changes the way the layer blends and it doesn't really look like dirt, or the dirt looks as if it's somehow see-through. Where this one, if I leave it to normal and I play with tint effects and curve effects, as you can see here, you can really make the assets fit your scene. Basically, if you have a more whitish dirt, you can play with a tint effect and like make it a bit more blue. Or if you have, in this case, a yellow dirt, a reddish tone, you can leave it depending on the asset, or you can like maximize that specific color. But it's very important to know that you should really play around with the curves adjustment of an asset layer in terms of dirt, as well as its tint, in order to get it match the scene. And that's pretty much it. As you guys can see, if I scrub through, everything looks pretty cool. We have the dynamic movement. Now, it's very easy to mix things up, but in terms of like an effect, it's very straightforward. First, you have your footage and you need to track it in order for any asset that you put in the project, it will be properly set in the scene and will follow those track objects in order to basically stick to the scene. After you do that, it's all about having the right assets and position them in such a way that they're gonna fit the scene, and that means playing with the timeline, bringing the back and forth, and more importantly, playing with how you make them appear in your scene. And that is specifically when it comes to dirt, is with playing with the opacity that we talked before. Now, the last thing that you can do is play with let me go here, is put a couple of masks around the dirt, because some assets, because of the way they work, you really need to have a mask around them, as you can see in this case, to help the asset to not basically crop frame. Because if it goes out of frame when the asset was created, then you can't really do, and it will show. But with the inclusion of a mask, it can either be an ellipse tool or just a general masking tool. By masking it and then feathering it out, as you can see here, we have 250, you're really gonna solve that problem.
Okay guys, so that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and you learned something, and as always, I'll see you on the next one. Make sure to check the links on the description, and until then, stay awesome.